Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard McHale, and I am the Deputy Director for Austin Resource Recovery, and I'm also the current president of the Municipal Waste Management Association, or MWMA, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion, bringing communities together. Before we launch into this discussion this afternoon, I want to briefly introduce MWMA to those of you who might be new to our organization. MWMA was formed in 1982. We are a national membership association. We represent solid waste directors, environmental commissioners, and other MSW decision makers from cities, counties, and other local jurisdictions. MWMA is also the environmental affiliate of the United States Conference of Mayors, and our mission is very much focused on sharing best practices, strategies, solutions that hopefully will innovate the way we do our jobs, as well as maximize efficiency and resources. One of the things we do is we host webinars and roundtable discussions throughout the year, such as today's. And when we can, we have a fall summit, which is an event much like this one. It's a closed door session. It's for public sector folks only, no private sector or media. And this is where we can talk about important issues and share strategies and solutions in an environment that we're all comfortable in. We do send out regular emails to promote all of our events, and also municipal news headlines, a little newsletter that kind of gives you some updates on what's going on in the industry. If you'd like to get on our distribution list, if you're not already, you can email us and we will share in the chat box. We will go ahead and put that email address in there for you to contact. I also would like to let you know that the MWMA Executive Committee met this spring and decided to host this year's Fall Summit here in Austin this October. So we are very excited to get back to meeting folks in person and having folks come to Austin. And we're currently finalizing the hotel currently, and we'll be able to confirm the dates here shortly. So stay tuned. We'd love to have you all come to Austin. Most important thing I want to say right now is that we at MWMA see today's conversation as the first of a series of conversations, kind of rethinking how we achieve diversity in our workforce and equity in the communities we serve. So this is not, just a thing we do today. This is a week-long, month-long, years-long, decades-long commitment to what needs to be done. It's a change in the way business has historically.
Did Richard freeze up?
Yes, he did.
Let's give him a couple of seconds to see if he comes back. Richard, I don't know if you can hear us, but you kind of froze up.
Okay, can we just point out that he has got Oscar the Grouch in his background?
Which speaks to Richard's wonderful personality. Just in case, I think Richard would want me to continue. What Richard was probably going to say, because we talked about this in advance, was that it's very important, this topic we're discussing today. And it's not something, oh, there you are, Richard, you're back. You froze up for a minute, but you're on mute.
And you're muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took a little break. I felt I was talking too much, so I needed a little break. So, but I'll get back to things now. Getting back to where we were, we put these procedures and policies in place, but we need to go back periodically and look at them. Back in Austin and back in the 1920s, our city put together a master plan that was really orchestrated to segregate people in Austin to other parts of town, people of color. And it made it so where they were currently living, those services were moved to a different part of town. So effectively, those folks had to move to another part of town in order to get those services. And Austin still deals with those issues today. In 2015, University of Toronto, Martin Prosperity Institute did a study and found Austin as the #1 most economically segregated city in the country. So as a result of that, City of Austin created a equity office and has an equity officer. And we work to try to reverse some of those historic inequalities that we experience here in Austin. So this happens all over, no one's immune, but it's something that we need to go ahead and correct the mistakes of the past. So logistics for today, we have a lot of time at the end of this presentation for questions and answers. If you have any questions, There's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can just type in your question and we will send it to the panelists. You can also raise your hands if you have a question during the presentation, and we'll let our speakers know that you have a question if they're not able to see that. We're starting this meeting with everyone muted, so to minimize any noise interference, we're going to ask everyone to keep themselves muted unless you need to speak. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Juby Headley with the MWMA staff, and he'll tell us a little bit about our presenters today. So thank you.
Thank you, Richard. The work you were talking about that Austin has done sounds fascinating. So I'm thinking, as we're thinking forward to the fall summit, maybe we could talk more about that in some kind of session there, as well as today. And I think that's one of the important things, one of the most important things Richard has articulated. As we thought about this webinar, as Waste Management approached us to talk about this webinar, and thank you to Susan Moulton and her team for this idea and this opportunity. One of the things we came up with for language, and you might find it a bit buzzwordy, but one of the things we started talking about is how do we integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into our organizational DNA? It's not something that we do for moments or months or years even. It's a function of the way we do business. Tiana and Susan in our previous conversations were very clear with me that this is about rethinking the way we do business and understanding that DEI, as we'll often be referring to it today just as an acronym, is something that helps your bottom line. It's the right thing to do for multiple reasons. And so we are so pleased to have with us today two wonderful speakers and presenters who are going to talk with us about this. Tiana Carter, hi Tiana, is the Senior Director of Culture and Engagement for Waste Management, the leading environmental service provider in North America. As a visionary who uses innovative thinking to move business and people forward, Tiana leads Waste Management's inclusion and diversity strategy, which reaches more than 50,000 employees. So we're talking about city-sized groups of constituents. Just so in case you were wondering whether Tiana understands a bit of what you municipal folks deal with, the answer is yes. Prior to joining Waste Management, Tiana served as the Vice President for Business Development and Innovation at Skills for Chicagoland's Future, a social impact startup focused on creating diversity workforce solutions, strategic diversity workforce solutions for over 90 leading brands. Today, Tiana lives in Houston, Texas with her husband and two daughters. Hi, Tiana, thank you for joining us. And we're also going to hear from Susan Robinson, who leads Waste Management's sustainability team. I just want to say that if you've been around MWMA for more than a minute, this is not your first or second or third time talking to Susan. In Susan's role at Waste Management, she's responsible for Waste Management's sustainability policy, advocacy, and reporting. Her 30+ years in the industry includes work in the public sector, nonprofit environmental work, consultancy, and over 25 years in the private sector. Her experience includes global commodity marketing, research and analysis of industry trends, and 20 years managing municipal solid waste and recycling contracts. She's active on boards throughout the industry. Her reputation precedes her. And I'm going to leave it at that. And with that, I would like to throw it to y'all to begin today.
Well, thank you, Juby, for that wonderful introduction, and to the whole MWMA team for having us on board. I know Susan, to your point, is a legend, so to speak. So I'm excited to be sharing the stage with her, talking about this really important topic. You know, WM, we have commitment and values as a corporation, and we'll spend some time talking about that today and how that shows up. And to your point, Juby, how it's integrated into the fabric and the DNA of our organization. But it didn't start through happenstance, right? If you want to advance to the next slide, we are very much driven by making an impact on the environment and driving sustainability. And so before we dive into our commitment values, I think it'd be helpful for Susan to tee us up to talk through sustainability to make sure we're all on the same page with what that means and how do we apply that. Susan?
Awesome. Thanks, Tiana, and thanks to Juby and to MWMA for having us today. We're really thrilled to have this opportunity. So I'm going to start our discussion on DE&I with sustainability. And you might be scratching your head and wondering why sustainability when we're talking about DE&I. So over the years, the terminology and efforts around sustainability have evolved a lot. You think about it, sustainability has always been synonymous with the environment. But in 2021, the definition fully embraces people, planet, and governance, how we manage our business. A relatively new acronym you may or may not be familiar with is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And companies like Waste Management are expected to be paying attention to all of these, which actually makes sense if you think about it. Well-run companies with good employee relations and good community programs that take care of the environment are lower risk, and they're actually better partners to work with as well. I really love the connectivity between people and the environment. Quite simply, when our employees and our communities have their own physical and mental health needs met, they can also take care of the environment much better. We're also going to talk a little bit later about environmental justice. It plays an important role in the connection between our operations and the communities in which we provide service. And it sets the stage for this holistic 360-degree view of sustainability that we think about. In other words, taking care of people and the environment makes good business sense. Juby, do you want to go ahead and move the slide ahead? So we have historically been accountable to policymakers and regulators, and we're very focused on providing services that our customers want from us. But again, as things have evolved in 2021, all of our stakeholders, our customers, our regulators, and our investors are actually kind of expecting the same things from us. And we're really seeing a convergence of a lot of issues going on. For example, emissions reductions efforts that reflect global climate change, such as using renewable fuel in our trucks, environmental services to help our customers reduce their emissions, such as recycling and organic services, diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, employee benefits, board and executive leadership around gender and race diversity, and transparent reporting on how we're running our business. So now I'd like to flip it back to Tiana, and so she can talk a little bit more about our commitments and values.
Thanks, Susan. If you want to go to the next slide, Juby. When we think about our commitment and values, we are very much guided. I think when folks think about the trash company, the natural inclination is, okay, you dig a hole and you throw trash in it. But we know that there is a lot more to it than just our landfill and our truck operation, but it starts with our people. And so we have been very intentional over the last 3 years rolling out new company commitment and values to not just be words on a page, but what we aspire to, what we measure our teams on, and how we continue to be a sustainability leader. So they're here on the page. I'm not going to read you all the descriptions, but we put our people first and we operate with successful integrity. Those are our core commitments, and then those are underpinned by our four values. Not to be confused that one is more important than the other, but they're all equally as important, which says a lot. Oftentimes you don't necessarily see companies lead with inclusion, equity, and diversity right up there with safety, but that is where we see that value. So it's up there with safety, the customers, and the environment, which we're really proud of, and we all rally behind. On the next slide, we talk about how that focus kind of underpins our sustainability goals, which Susan will talk to. When we rolled out our values, I'll tell you that we leveraged thousands of ambassadors across the country to lead programming within our specific workforce sites so that every single employee understood what our values were, because we can't measure you on values if you don't understand them. So not only is it incorporated in our kind of talk track, but it's in our performance reviews. It's how you get hired, promoted, how you get your bonus. And so again, all of those values are incorporated and very important to us. So Susan, I'll let you talk about
Yeah, it's great. They really do. It all fits together. Really, all of this fits together. And as part of our sustainability goals, we updated them in 2018. And we now have long-term 2038 people and planet goals that include a commitment both to reducing our emissions by an average of over 2% per year, while also supporting our commitment to making the communities in which we live safe, resilient, and sustainable. Then we added a couple of 2019 goals, of short-term goals in 2019 to help us along that path to reaching those longer term 2038 goals. That includes increasing our use of natural gas trucks, increasing our use of renewable fuel, reducing contamination at our recycling facilities, moving to 100% renewable electricity use at all our facilities, developing better measurement programs for our landfills, and paying all of our employees, 100% of our employees, a living wage, a goal, by the way, that we have actually already achieved. And we also have added new inclusion, equity, and diversity goals as part of our people goals, which Tiana will dive into next.
Thanks, Susan. All right, so the next slide. So, well, before we even talk about that, Susan and I were joking when we think about sustainability in the environment. I have kind of personally started to think about how do I operationalize our sustainability goals. So I'm really proud that I've been buying post-recycled sneakers from certain corporations and shoes. So I'll let you know how it feels to wear plastic bottles, recycled plastic bottles on your feet. But so far it hasn't gotten hot enough where my feet are sweating. So far so good, folks. Get you some some shoes. But in terms of our goals, we really wanted to be intentional, right? When you look around the industry, there's a lot of opportunity that's ahead of us, but we wanted to be very focused on what we can do. I think a lot of companies are getting a bit overwhelmed with the amount of areas of opportunity to address when it comes to social inequality. And so for us, we said, let's really rally behind two primary areas of focus so that we can do it right. Those two goals is to lead the industry in female representation with a specific emphasis on increasing that at the front lines and promoting women into leadership roles. I think the waste industry in particular has historically been male dominated. So this is a goal that we think will not only help waste management, but help lift the industry in general. If we're starting to really look at what are those things that attract more women and how can we do that? And you know, we have no pride of authorship. My goal really is to get more women into the industry in general. And so that's why we're really happy to share some of this information with the team here. The other thing is around achieving ethnic diversity in each segment of our workforce with a specific emphasis on leadership. I think a lot of us can look around and look at our frontline workforce, typically tends to be pretty diverse, right? And a lot of times that frontline diversity can give us air cover over our organization. But when you peel back that onion and you start to look at the management or the senior leaders, it's not reflective always of what's in that frontline workforce and then ultimately the community that you're serving. And so we wanted to be very intentional, and we'll talk about the strategies on how we're trying to address both of these as we progress the presentation. But those are our goals. We did launch a big audacious goal in addition to that. That's not on the slide. It was just approved by the board to actually be a leader, not just in the industry, but a globally recognized leader of DEI, a global recognized DEI leader. So we are really excited about that. That's going to set the bar even higher for us to aspire to. So we're excited about that and what that means. If we advance over to the next slide, you'll look at how we started operationalizing. So while the tragic death of George Floyd last year really did add an accelerant onto the strategy, you know, I had started in this role, 6 months prior, and then also our new CEO, Jim Fish, has always had the vision of how do we make sure that this is truly the best place to work for anyone to be hired and to build a career. And so when that incident happened, our CEO was out there day one, you know, putting out his kind of stake in the ground to say, I want us as an organization to be a part of the solution. And being a part of the solution means acknowledging that there's opportunity for us to address. And so that really started that domino to get leaders aligned and all the members of our internal community aligned on how we address that. We know that operating with authenticity and vulnerability really does lead to change. And so we sparked a series of courageous conversations, starting with our entire SLT, who shared their own personal experiences about where they may have skid their knees a little bit in the space or where they could have done things differently. And I think that gave others permission to acknowledge that there was opportunity and work to be done. And that has, I think, led to some success and engagement from a lot of leaders across the enterprise. So we're really excited about that. As a result, we launched a Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity Leadership Council, where each one of our lines of business nominated a key leader, because we had to move it from, is this an HR responsibility or is this everyone's responsibility? And so when we made that pivot, it became part of the business responsibility to be thinking about this. So you should be talking about DEI, in the same conversations, you're talking about your performance metrics for the business, your bottom line, because all of these things intersect and it's really important. If you're wondering, well, how does it intertwine? Why does it matter? How does DEI intersect? If you have a workforce that can feel like they can show up and truly be their authentic selves, they see themselves reflected in leadership, they're going to perform better. And if they perform better, you have better operational metrics and better revenue to the bottom line. So all of these things intersect. When you think about yourself, you're going to work hard for somebody you feel like cares about you than if somebody just treats you as if you're disposable, right? And so how do all of those things play an impact and an effect? And that's what's helped us to really think about that. The last thing I'll say on this is, as a part of it, once all of our leaders started to engage, we had this, I'd say, wave of employees and surge of employees who say, okay, I want to raise my hand, I want to do something, but I don't know what. And they were getting kind of, analysis paralysis. And so we launched the Power of One campaign to challenge all of our employees to come up with one solution that they could implement that would better WM in the world and make it a better place and great place to work and build a career. So that's one thing, but one person can change the world and one person can really have an impact. And so imagine the power of 50,000. So all of our employees were continuing to engage on that and getting tons of ideas, thousands of ideas from employees on what they are personally doing, which has definitely made this a grassroots and sustainable effort. So I'll pause there since I know that there's a lot. And then, I don't know, Juby, if there's any questions coming in, but I'm happy to answer as we go. This next slide here captures how does that show up? And so we had the courageous conversations with leaders, but then how do we bring the voices of our employees to the table? And so we continued that series of courageous conversations, celebrating different cultures through the month. So, you have Hispanic Heritage Month, Pride Month, Black History Month. We used all of those opportunities to highlight certain employees, whether it be through a panel conversation or stories highlighted in our weekly newsletter or podcasts. We're trying all types of channels to meet people where they are with different types of content to celebrate the cultures and also have tough conversations. I mean, we've talked about, I remember during Black History Month, we were talking about black hair and, the challenges associated with the perception of what professional looks like. Those are real conversations that matter to people. And you don't know and you don't learn until you have an opportunity to listen and hear it firsthand. And so those have been really impactful and powerful. So it's one thing to have conversation, it's also another thing to have action. And so we've looked at how do we also continue to create opportunities for all. So we launched a program called Innovative Employment Pathways, where we partner with community agencies to attract the overlooked and underserved. So that's homeless, that's youth, that's women, so we partner with all these different organizations in particular because those disenfranchised oftentimes need wraparound services that as an employer, we're not equipped to provide, right? We're not always equipped to provide you transportation and, childcare and things of that nature, but some of these community agencies are. And so how can we partner to really create a pathway for employment to help continue to bring in new pipelines of talent? So those are some other creative things. We're partnering with different associations like Women in Trucking to help drive more women to the business, no pun intended. So there's just a lot of different strategies and avenues that we are working our channels to drive impact. The last thing I'll mention on this is it's not just about hiring internally, it's also about where we spend our dollars. And so as a Fortune 250, we're spending billions of dollars each year, whether it's on vendors and trucks and supplies, but where are we spending that money? And so we've launched an initiative to foster supply chain diversity called Share the Green. And while we've always had a supply chain initiative, one of the challenges I often hear from business leaders inside and even outside of our organization is, how do we find those small businesses or those women and minority-owned businesses to engage with? And so we saw that there was a gap and an opportunity. So we launched this program where it's a pitch contest and we partner with different corporations and organizations around the country to drive those small businesses and match them up with corporations like a WM so that they can hear pitches from these businesses and then, offer them contracts or further engage. But it's really a grassroots effort to, again, be intentional about where we're spending our dollars and not just abdicating the responsibility to do diversity to another partner by just donating a check somewhere. We're really trying to invest and watch those dollars and see how it's impacting through these small businesses. So those are just a little flavorings of those things. You can go on our diversity site. All of these videos are live on there as well. If you want to watch any of them, they're available for you to look at. So if we go to the next slide, I will kick it to Susan to talk about our environmental justice and how that intersects.
Great. You know, I'm going to tack on a little bit to what Tiana just talked about. So all of we have on our sustainability website, as well as the WM.com website, we have a lot of really good information. And one of the things we do, we talk about our supply chain and the purchase that we make. We have a very deliberate supply chain plan that we actually post. And it really gives a good sense of the priorities that we have and how committed we are, and really the acts that we're taking to really make sure that we are kind of walking the talk in every way in terms of the things that the role that we're playing as part of a purchaser as well. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to talk about environmental justice for a little bit. I think it's probably one of the most talked about policy discussions in our industry in 2021. In our business, I think about EJ as the intersection of our operations or our facilities, quite frankly, and our communities. And the more time I spend understanding the nuances of EJ, and the more respect I have for the work we've done and the work that we still need to do. Well, over a decade ago, we worked with US EPA and with a host of nonprofit organizations as EPA was developing their EJ screen mapping tool. It's a really interesting tool that combines environmental and demographic indicators in web accessible maps and reports. It's really a powerful asset, and it enables companies to precisely understand the demographics around their facilities. And you can actually make the parameters larger and smaller. We've actually narrowed in on a 1 kilometer radius around each of our 1,200 facilities. So it's a really interesting tool. And it basically, it has a whole database assessment with protocols, and it's all available publicly. To my knowledge, we are the only company in our industry that uses EJ Screen, and we post, actually, you can see this diagram on the right, we post that on our website every year, and it basically each of our sites is represented. And we also, I'll say, in really digging deep and understanding where we've been and where we're going, I've learned we have some great best practices of working to meet our local community's needs. And we need to do more. We're currently embarking upon a process to map more information about each of our facilities to ensure transparent reporting paired with the analysis of the data, right? And the development of systems to make sure that we're supporting our communities with those with the greatest needs into the future. I think of environmental justice in 2021 and beyond as something that is probably the best thing that we will be doing. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be complicated. But we take the responsibility really seriously and see it as an important part of our sustainability journey. Tiana, back to you.
Thanks, Susan. Well, the good thing is the slides are over, y'all. The last slide really just captures the different topics that we touched on, right? We talked about the importance of people. We talked about how we engage with the community through our programs like IEP, and there are certainly other ways, the environment, and then being intentional about governance. And so we want to open the floor, I think, Juby, for questions, and I think we'll get some good meat and potatoes out of those dialogues, but happy to dive in any place that there is of interest from you or the audience.
Thank you so much, Tiana and Susan. There's so much spinning in my head from everything you've said today. Where I think we will start, and before I start, I just want to say one thing. Tiana, I heard the words authenticity and vulnerability during your presentation, and maybe it shouldn't be, but it was kind of stunning to me to think about that in an organizational corporate context. The notion that we would want our leadership to be vulnerable enough to be critiqued, or that we would want to present an authentic organizational culture so that folks are represented and feel empowered. It's just, it really is a sea change in the way I, at least, have been acculturated to think about what we expect from business or from organizations or from government even. So that was just stunning. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when you think about that. I mean, think about yourself. When do you come up with your best ideas? It's when you're in a safe space where you can, like, hey, I got something I want to kick around. What do you think? You can do that when you trust the person. But if you don't have the trust, and trust comes from building rapport and having those micro moments and learning a little bit about your kids or your projects or what keeps you up at night. All of those things matter, and ultimately does help business in the long run because people can be themselves at work. And so it's such a overlooked opportunity for leaders, and a lot of times leaders run away from it, but you really do unlock the potential of your talent when you create an environment and a culture where they can show up as themselves, modeled by you showing up as yourself every day.
Wow. I love that. I'm going to be thinking about that days, weeks, months, etc. forward. When we think about the practical changes, the implementation, I think one of the places we can start, because I'm aware Richard and all of our leadership and so many folks we come into contact with every day at MWMA talk about this as an issue, driver recruitment. We keep seeing the reports about numbers. And I'm very aware that that's an issue that's industry-wide right now. How does Waste Management leverage its DEI, its diversity, equity, and inclusion practice to address this? And what are ways that our folks can think about that as a DEI need or something to address, if that question makes sense?
No, it does, and I almost wouldn't see it as a DEI need more than just a simple a business need in general, right? Because as we were talking about, a lot of the frontline workforce is diverse just by nature, but I think some of the bigger challenges really center around stigma. Think about ourselves. I mean, we're in the industry. I think all of us on the call is in the industry in some shape or capacity. How many of you are coaching your kids to become drivers? Probably very few, right? Because you're thinking about other pathways. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to really be much more intentional to think about how do we articulate the career paths and the opportunities that are available in this industry, because it's vast, but people aren't thinking about it. They're thinking about it after the fact. And I think there's also an opportunity from a workforce development perspective. When you think about niche workforce development around the CDL certification, there's not a lot of programs out there to help with CDLs and things of that nature. You're seeing much more on the tech and the STEM and things of that nature, the sexy stuff. But there's really not a lot around kind of manufacturing, trucking, and things of that nature, which are trades. And I think there has been this period of time where somehow the trades got oh, don't go into trades, everybody needs to go to college. But I think we really need to be turning that on its head and thinking about how do we start to get to students at a younger age to celebrate and highlight the career pathways that are in this. So, and I'd say the third challenge that I commonly see is around the CDL age requirement. That CDL age requirement is 21. A lot of times when you're 18, you graduate college, you graduate high school, you go get that first job, and you kind of stick in that area. You might jump around from employer to employer, but if you go and your first job is retail or food service, next thing you know, you have 5 different jobs that are retail food service. And so we're missing that critical period, I think, a lot of times with that CDL license, that those 18 and 21-year-olds have now found a different path early on, and we haven't captured them yet. And so I think there's some systematic barriers that we might have that's hindering us from attracting talent. And so, there's certainly a lot of ways that we try to address it, and I won't go to the laundry list because I'm getting a little long in the tooth here, but I think we have to look at 4 different things. It's transferable skills. A lot of hiring managers are looking for you to have 2, 5, 10 years in waste experience before they hire you. And the reality is we need to be a little more open to the backgrounds. I think about, bus drivers, right? We have a high population of women who are bus drivers. It's cyclical. So even with the pandemic, there's a lot in the market. I mean, that would have been an ideal time to be targeting the CDL bus driver. I don't know about you, but backing up a bus with 50 kids in it is a lot more distracting to me than picking up a can, right? So I think there's some transferable skills that's available. That storytelling we talked about, and then also continuing to be intentional about purpose. I think talent now is looking more to decide their own terms, and so it's not just about the job anymore. It's about what can you offer me in terms of benefits, work-life balance, and work-life integration, career path. If I'm not going to stay at a job for 20 years anymore, right? I'm going to stay at a job for 2 years and I'm going to say, how soon can I be the CEO? That's what the young people are thinking about. Now, is that the reality? It's not, but we need to at least provide them the pathway of, well, here's how you would move up and here's the avenue to get there. I think a lot of times we're missing the boat on that. And so those are just kind of a few quick things I would recommend that I've seen.
Yeah.
So Tiana, I just have to ask, so you think I might be the only grandmother who's given her grandkids a front loader, a side loader, and a roll-off truck, encouraging them to pick which truck?
I mean, you know. But it's funny, right? When you think about, are we coaching our kids to do that? We're probably not. So
I love this notion that we recognize it's 2021, and maybe not only is everyone not headed for college, but maybe everyone doesn't literally need to be at a very specific point in time that we've decided is the path. So you also talked about living wage during that, and we know these jobs are among those jobs that folks can have and have an idea that they might be able to raise a family, have children, pay rent, have a balance in their lives, have healthcare. So it's a wonderful way to frame it. You also talked about the fact that some of the young folks are thinking, what's my path in this company? How are you planning to hold on to me, to recognize my talents and promote me? So as we think about how we incorporate those opportunities in our organizations, one of the things we have to think about is leadership, right? So how do we open up leadership? And you alluded to this in your presentation, but can we dig a little deeper on how do we make sure that we're actually creating meaningful opportunities for a broad swath of our communities, our culture, to find and grasp and thrive in leadership in our various organizations?
yeah, no, I think great question there. I think there's, I'd set the stage by saying there's really only two ways to increase diversity at an organization. It's through hiring and it's through turnover, right? So that's what it simply boils down to. But I think a lot of times when you think about hiring, organizations are often going external. They're not thinking about, I have this variety of talent at my front. How do I develop that? Because it's easier to just go out and buy talent, but then you're going out buying the same type of talent when in actuality, you have a workforce available. I think there was a McKinsey study that talked about 64% of frontline workers are women and people of color, and only 32% in the executive suite. So when you look at the sheer numbers, the talent is there, but a lot of organizations, they spend money on learning and development for the technical skills in the job rather than the development of those individuals to ascend and grow within the organization. And we recognized that that was an opportunity for us. And so we launched, we were super proud of it because it was on the front of the New York Times yesterday, our chief people officer, a program called Your Tomorrow, because we do recognize the need to invest in our workforce and allow them to grow. And it might not be in the same exact skill set that they have now. And the Your Tomorrow program is where WM will pay 100% of the cost for our employees to earn their bachelor's degree, their associate's degree, as well as certificates in areas like data analytics or business management, because that is kind of the linchpin that will help them move up. And then the kicker, which is my favorite surprise that comes at the end, is we're also offering this benefit to their spouses and their children. And so that's your retention hook, right? So if you have, I think like 30% of the workforce has kids who are, 16 and, in that college bracket, if you will, that's a hook to want to stay with a company if you know that you're not going to have to pay out of pocket for college for them to go to Purdue. I mean, some of the education institutions we are partnered with are really strong organizations. And so we have to be innovative now when it comes to talent and attracting that talent. And again, it's more than just what's in my paycheck. It's how are you going to grow and how are you going to develop me?
Yeah. The questions, Judy informs me, are coming in fast and furious from our audience. So I'm going to want to turn to that soon. But before we do, Susan, I want to actually take a question that we got in advance from one of our audience to lead off that section. And this is a question from Sue Magnus from the city of Cincinnati. Hey, Sue, I know you're out there. Sue is one of our long-standing members and supporters. And it begins to, as you talked about, Susan, during the presentation, change our focus from inward, what are we doing to develop internally and bring folks up and promote folks and sustain folks, to outward, what you were talking about, how do we best serve our constituents? How do we best serve the communities we operate in? And so her question, and I'm going to do a little bit of trying to read a little bit of what she said in advance. She said, let's talk about equitable access to recycling in large multifamily and affordable / low-income housing situations. I think what Sue's referring to is the fact that authorities, government officials, and landlords don't necessarily want to be responsible for this function. They probably see it as ancillary to their core functions, which is kind of a through line in this conversation, isn't it? But if we can't serve those folks with recycling, if they don't have access to recycling, how do we approach that as a equity issue? And how do we begin to rethink that? Because sure, most cities I'm aware of, most communities I'm aware of also offer drop-off opportunities. But drop-off opportunities presuppose access to transportation, for one thing. And if you don't have access to transportation, if you don't have a car or somebody who's willing to drive you, that becomes an equity issue. So how do we begin to think about that as an equity issue and think about how to address it? Does that make sense, Susan?
No,
question?
totally. And I think it's a great question. And I think I'm going to tap into a little bit of how Tiana described the work that we did internally at Waste Management. It starts with leadership. And it really starts with the leadership of a community and the policies that a community establishes for itself. And I kind of pressure tested that a little bit. And indeed, you find those communities that provide equitable service to everybody within the community. It starts with an ordinance, a city ordinance, a regulation, or a county ordinance that requires equitable provision of those services to everybody in that community. Once you do that, you create that policy, then you build it into your contractual requirements and to your ordinances, and you can even have mechanisms to ensure that there is an incentive to perform at the facility level, at the building level, for example, a fine if it's not provided. And you can then build education programs around that as well. So I don't think we get off the hook by contracting it out without owning the responsibility to lead, and whether it's a company or a community or a state. We must really create those policies that show we mean it and we're committed to it. And from there, we can develop then the implementation actions to actually make it work. It doesn't make it easy. I will tell you, for example, multifamily recycling of any kind is probably one of the hardest things we do, right? It's very difficult. So it requires an additional work to, how do we help success? Don't set up to fail. Let's go in with the right education tools, the right on-site help, creating teams to work, making sure that we actually set that program up to succeed and, really tackling it, kind of, again, that 360 view, making sure the signage reflects the culture of the community who lives there. And that's something I know we've done a lot of work on to make sure that we transcreate the signage so that it really folks understand the materials of the things they're buying and shopping for and know how to recycle those. So it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy solution, but certainly it starts at the top and then we can make it happen from there.
Tiana, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Susan definitely touched on it.
Juby put me in charge of monitoring Q&As, and we have a lot of good ones. By the way, I'm Judy Sheehan with the Conference of Mayors at MWMA. So we have 15 minutes left. I like to get to all these questions if we can, so let's keep that in mind. We have a question from Liz asking about the EJ screen. She asks, are temp and contract workers included in the EJ screen for all facilities? I think that's to you, Susan.
Yeah, that's a great question. So an EJ screen, actually what it does, it's not looking at our employees, it's looking at who lives around our facilities. So it basically takes every one of our operating sites and it takes the radius around it and it looks at, it's usually starting by census tract. It's done by the US government, census, a lot of different kinds of census data for the most part. And so it's actually looking at the economics, at the racial diversity, education levels, all sorts. You can dig really deep, and they're actually expanding it this summer. I think by the end of the year, you'll see more layers of information. So it's not looking so much at it's not looking at our employees. It's actually looking at who's living around our facilities.
Okay, very good. Richard Spear, a longtime member of ours, just wanted to make a comment regarding your bus driver. He said his local collector provider will recruit from school bus drivers, and as a result, 38% of their 200 drivers are women. So that's from Richard. He just wanted to give that comment. From Christina, she said, for Susan and Tiana, I work in procurement for a municipality. What top 2 or 3 approaches have succeeded at waste management to increase diversity among your suppliers?
So I mentioned earlier, we launched the Share the Green initiative, which is that supply chain diversity program. And through that, we have a lot of learning sessions to understand what are the barriers that keep some of these suppliers from getting in the corporations. And there are 2 major things that we've identified that we've built some workarounds around. The first one is oftentimes with business terms, you have a net 75 payout for services rendered. When you're a small business, waiting 75 days to get paid on something is almost insurvivable, right? And so we've realized that we have to adjust that approach in that time frame and make it a lot shorter for small businesses. And so we have fixed that problem in many cases. And if not in your small business, call Todd, he'll adjust it. And then the other thing is around education on the process. It is really complex to get into a major corporation between insurance and legal requirements and all the steps. And a lot of times small businesses get very overwhelmed and they're very unfamiliar with the process. And so what we've started to do as a part of that initiative is spend 6 weeks educating suppliers on how to get through WM's procurement process, and many other businesses, which they're not all created equal, but there are some consistent threads, right, that you have to navigate. So it's education. And then the third thing that I would comment on is a lot of businesses require that MBE or WBE certification, which is a pretty complex process. It sounds like it's an easy to get, but it's not. And so we've actually started to pay for the certification on behalf of the small businesses so that we can take on the cost burden for them and make it easier for them to get certified and into our system. And so those were 3 things that we rolled out so that we can increase the pool of small businesses getting into our supply chain.
And then I'll just add on that, on top of that, the supply chain process itself, they have goals, they have some policies and goals they drive internally. And I'll make the comment, from a long history of trying to drive to more purchasing, goals, to purchasing goals. It's not a quick process. I mean, we've worked with our supply chain team, which is awesome, for years, and they do things incrementally. So you can't expect, a sea change overnight. I think, for big companies or for big cities, they're big purchases often, and they're very careful and cautious to protect their customers. And so I think we really work very carefully and closely with them to understand the things they need to prioritize so that we can make that shift and really drive towards those diversity and those diversity goals as well.
Excellent. I have 2 related questions. The first from Jennifer. Wonderful to hear all this work. Thank you for the leadership. Did you have any surprising points of pushback as you developed the DEIJ goals and objectives? And then also related from Asher, he says, how does waste management approach the challenge of naysayers within an organization that push back against negative response to equity, i.e. it doesn't affect me. I don't think it's as big of an issue as people make it out to be, etc.
Yeah. I think that's a common challenge that a lot of DEI leaders struggle with are the naysayers. And there's 2 things that, I'll answer this in 2 parts. The first one is it's not a big deal. Well, look around. I mean, if you look around the room and you see that diversity is missing, then there's some opportunity. And I think by using data to drive that, we use a lot of data. So we led the conversations with, well, here are the numbers, and then here's where we are. And that really helped dispel that there's not an issue because we use data to help drive the strategy rather than anecdotes. I think a lot of leaders try to lead with anecdotes, and that's effective for a little bit, but that starts to wear away when people have follow-up questions. And so I'd say lead with data. The second thing that I'd say is there's this perception that, okay, if we're going to focus on diversity, we might compromise the talent. And at the end of the day, I have jobs to fill and I'm on a timeline. So we realized that our time to fill goals were conflicting with our DEI goals. And so we recognize that it takes a little bit longer to ensure that you have a diverse slate of candidates presented. And we've empowered our managers to take a little more time and allow that to happen rather than just hire the first applicant that comes in because you need it filled. And I think we have started to see a strong sea change with that having an impact is making sure that those talent acquisition goals don't conflict with the DEI goals. And so hopefully that answers that question, Judy.
Thank you. I have a question also from Robert. It says, great overview and DEI advancements within the organization and leading the industry. He asked, what specific DEI activities does Waste Management plan on or foresee advancing within their core residential programs / services to be contracted communities, i.e. providing equitable services or adjusted fees to economically challenged areas and neighborhoods?
Why don't I start, and Tiana, I can turn it over to you if you have anything to add. And I think I'm going to go back to, again, I'm a policy wonk, okay? And a lot of this really has to be driven by a local community. So it's, you set the stage. I would say you create your own policies internally. And then when you select your service provider, you ask your service provider what their policies are, and you evaluate them on what their policies are. So you're matching now your policies with your service provider. And that really is the best way you start to move forward with that full, services that are reflecting what you're looking for in your local community. So it really, again, I'll go back to saying it starts really with a community has to prioritize it and then drive it through to all parts of the service that you provide to your residents.
Tiana, did you want to add to that, or are we good?
No, Susan just is, she'll just close it out. That was good.
Well, actually, Susan Magnus asked a follow-up question, I think, to her question she submitted. So sorry for going back a little bit. I didn't see that she asked a question until a little later and scrolled. She says, I'm assuming it's you, Susan, do you have example or sample ordinances and policies that are inclusive that you'd be willing to share?
I actually got a copy of one this morning from the city of Seattle that's written it's around equity of providing the same level of service throughout the community. So I'll forward that to you and you'll have that then at hand to be able to forward.
And just a reminder for folks, you can still ask questions. We have a few more minutes. We have 6 minutes in total. And that this session has been recorded and the PowerPoint presentation or deck is going to be made available on the MWMA website. It is not to be made available on the MWMA website. I am sorry, Juby, for and.
But the video absolutely will be.
The video will be on. So, okay. Actually, I personally had a question. Does Waste Management provide any type of management training or leadership skills so people can start from driving truck or hauling to going up? And you might have covered in your presentation, and sometimes when you're balancing everything else, you can't. I didn't hear that, but you might have covered that.
No, you didn't hear right because we didn't touch on it. So that's a good call out. So one of the things that we identified as an opportunity. So I'll take you up 30,000 feet and then I'll bring you back down. So we launched that Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, and they evaluated kind of 5 areas for us: our talent acquisition strategies, our talent development strategies, how are we educating our workforce on DEI, how are we tracking our metrics, and how are we building internal community. And when we peeled apart the onion on the talent development, every market was doing it a little bit different. Some markets would have leadership forums and other markets would have these different things. And so we identified that there was an opportunity to have a standard leadership training across the enterprise. And this is not just DEI, this is just general standardizing of leadership training and making sure DEI is a component of that. And so that's been added in. And then, of course, coupled with the Your Tomorrow College program, I think we've really set ourselves up to create some pathways for our employees to grow and develop. We've also rolled out DEI training that is required for all directors and above as well. And it's facilitated small group cohort style diversity training, and we are in the throes of that, and it's going really well. And so while the strategy sounds like it's robust, y'all. We are still learning. There is still work to do. And so don't get overwhelmed. You just have to start somewhere. And I think education is always the best place to start.
Can I also ask a subsequent question? I know one of the things that we have talked at the MWMA often about is giving people a chance to start working. And so the whole don't check the box if you have a federal offense or a felony. Does Waste Management, are you able to do that in order to start your workers
Yeah, I have to.
for a good paying job?
Yeah, I don't want to speak out of turn here, or I'll get a call from our legal team in 5 minutes. But let me get back to you on that question. But I do think that is a national requirement. We do have to do motor vehicle checks for sure. You know, driving, moving violation checks. But I'll have to confirm on the other. But I'm pretty sure we're compliant with the ban the box.
Was just personally curious. So it's one of those things that we struggle with at the local level, trying to provide economic opportunities for all. So I don't see any more questions in the queue except for thank yous. So do you have any, Tiana or Susan, do you have any last minute comments or questions before we close out?
I'll let Susan go first.
I have to say thank you for this opportunity. We're thrilled. I can't think of a group that is more important in terms of having this conversation, and our partners, and we all understand the challenges that we have. I think they're real, and we love and appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the things that we're doing and the places we recognize we need to do more. So we look forward to working with you on all of the above. Tiana?
No, I think you said it well. Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a pleasure here. And certainly I know on one of the last slides it had mine and Susan's contact information. If you all have follow-up questions or interested in partnering us on any of these programs, we are more than happy to have a conversation and get engaged with you and your groups as well. So thank you.
And as Juby and Richard said in the beginning, this is the beginning of many conversations. This is just a step. We have a long way to go, but we can hopefully do it together and learn from each other. So personally, I want to thank Tiana and Susan for sharing your wisdom. And I want to thank Waste Management for recognizing the need and stepping forward and showing leadership. And hopefully we can learn from each other as we move forward. So any other closing comments, Juby or Richard?
I just would like to thank Juby and Judy for getting this webinar together. This has been great, and Tiana and Susan, great information. Susan, every time I see you speak, you give great information. This time I get to hear great information from Tiana, so it was really good to hear, and it kind of validates some things that we're doing here in Austin. To hear that y'all are doing those things as well, but also heard some new ideas, and those are things that we'll take back and we'll start the discussions and to see if we can implement those here. So thank you all both for the presentation.
And thanks to all of you, Tiana, Susan, Judy, Richard. This has been a wonderful conversation. On the days I love my job best, it's because I get to create space for folks to do things like have these conversations and share these best practices and information. So it's always wonderful. And like you alluded to, Tiana, in this conversation, and you, Susan, as well, everybody really did. It's so timely, it's even past time, and it's so important. So it's great that we begin this process of having this conversation. So thank you everyone for attending. This will be available on our website, www.usmayors.org/MWMA in the future. You can share the registration link, and if folks provide us with a little information, everybody can watch it. So that will be wonderful. And we encourage you to share it far and wide because this has been such important, vital information. Our next webinar is coming up in July, and that's going to be on glass. We stay tackling the difficult conversations. They aren't really comparable, but what we want to do through these webinars is really create spaces to have conversations about how we do business in so many ways. And this is a beginning. I am going to go ahead and say and put myself out there, even though I have to run it up a couple of chains that are on this call, that this is probably a conversation we'll continue at our fall summit in Austin in October, the dates of which we will be sharing with you next week. So stay tuned for that. If you missed either Tiana's or Susan's email or our email, email us at mwma@usmayors.org. And we'll make sure we can get you in contact with Susan and Tiana if you have any follow-up questions or need any information, and also with us so you know when we're having our fall summit and how you can attend. Thank you so much. This was a great, important, informative, educational, edifying way to spend an afternoon. So thank you, Tiana. Thank you, Susan. We'll hear more soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.